It's early February, and the winds sweeping up the east coast of Africa are driving huge waves into the area where we're operating in the North Arabian Sea. I'm a young lieutenant, strapped into an ejection seat in a Navy jet, trying to provide moral support to my pilot, who is desperately trying to get us safely back aboard USS Enterprise. Now, he's exhausted since we've been flying at low altitudes in the dark for over 4 hours. He's got vertigo so bad, I'm not sure he can walk a straight line, much less fly one. Outside, the conditions aren't much better. It's pitch black, the middle of the night. Our windscreen is covered with salt spray from our low altitude mission. Ahead, steaming along in the dark, is the ship, our one and only safe haven, and we are thrilled when we catch a glimpse of it. But there's a problem. Those waves I mentioned? Well, aircraft carriers are big, but they're still floating objects, and that means they're affected by wind and wave like any boat, and USS Enterprise is no different. Now, we have to land on it. There's no doubt about that. There is no other option. But the deck, the landing area, is moving a lot. A ship is moving forward, steaming along at a speed of 12 to 15 miles an hour like it always does. But more to the point, it's plunging into the troughs between those huge monster waves. It's rolling like a canoe. It's yawing like a car on ice. And to top it all off, it's riding the waves up and down like a merry-go-round, heaving vertically up to 20 feet every 10 or 20 seconds. It's pretty wild. As we set up for a long straight-in approach, we hear from the LSO, the landing signal officer, the guy who's stationed on the flight deck to help guide pilots aboard. And the news isn't good. The deck is moving. We knew that. We're beyond the limits for the optical landing system. Please disregard. We didn't know that. In other words, we're not going to have a glide slope to follow as we approach the ship. He adds with a bit of gallows humor, "You sound good. Keep it coming." That's great. Thanks. Now, as we make our first pass, the bow plunges and we land long past all 4 of the arresting gear wires, any one of which we have to catch with our tail hook to safely land. 5 minutes later, on our second pass, we're waved off in close as the ship surges upward on a huge swell that could have smashed our landing gear or worse. Our next pass is good, but we land a little bit long and very hard, and our hook skips over the 4-wire, the last one. So we're flying again. As we come around for our 4th pass, I gotta tell you, I'm getting really worried about my pilot. He's hunched forward over the controls. He's staring at the flight instruments, sweating even though the air conditioning is blasting in the airplane. He's muttering under his breath, and he is clearly struggling to control both the airplane and his own vertigo. He's just hanging on by a thread. In close, he starts to drift left, and as we cross over the fantail, I'm looking down, calling out, "Water, water, steel!" And he makes a play for the deck. And then there's that moment you have in every night landing aboard the ship, where you're not sure whether you landed or died. There's a huge crash, deceleration that you simply have to experience to understand. And suddenly we're stopped, and a deckhand with flashlights is directing us safely out of the landing area, and we're home. Now, I know that there aren't that many people who've had that exact experience, thankfully. But as I work with leaders in all kinds of organizations, I find that there are lots of people who are experiencing something kind of like that every day. Our workplace environments are challenging, with multi-generational workforces and the impact of globalization and technology sweeping through our companies. Outside, the conditions are much better, with better funded, more aggressive competition than most of us have ever seen before. So we're all challenged to change, to try to keep up. And as it turns out, inside our heads, we've got something that we're wrestling with. Not vertigo this time, but our own habits of thought. Now, just to be clear, I am not accusing anyone of not wanting to change. Almost everyone I work with sees the need for change and wants to be part of it. But what I am saying is that we, as humans, have evolved over thousands of years in a world that changed very slowly. And we've evolved to be risk-averse for good reasons. Now, there's a caveman part of our brain that harbors some hard-earned fears that make a ton of sense. An innate fear of things like heights and fire and snakes and aggressive body language. They make sense because any of our caveman ancestors without those fears probably didn't survive very long. But the place we run into problems is when that caveman part of our brain starts to harbor fears and react to much more modern things, like a Sunday morning email from the boss, or a call from HR, or that company-wide change initiative. Because the caveman part of our brain functions as an early warning system. trying to protect us from all the things we encounter in a day. And it has a pretty binary response that we usually refer to as fight or flight. We either turn and face it and battle it out, or we turn and run. So before the thinking part of our brain even engages, that caveman part, what brain scientists call the amygdala, has already fired up a response to let the body know, hey, I've got this. Now, the bad news is that these responses are hardwired, and it's tough to change them simply because you want to. But the good news is that that particular part of the brain learns through experience. So if the thinking part of your brain can offer a compromise, say, I know you're afraid of this, but let's give it a try just this once. Over time, you can potentially diffuse or redirect that caveman response to something more useful. Over time, you can actually retrain your brain to respond differently and respond in the way that elite leaders respond more often than not. You can train your brain to actually think like an elite leader, to restructure and de-energize those automatic fear-based responses in favor of more constructive, forward-looking, and frankly, more thoughtful approaches. And that's what my work with the 11 Essentials of Leadership is all about. It's a list of 11 common situations with suggested responses that will get you started in the right direction. It's based on research from McKinsey and the Leadership Circle and includes the experience of frontline combat leaders and my own experience in naval aviation, corporate, startup, and leadership coaching environments. So, no year-long, highly structured programs that demand that you agree to change who you are. Just a list of techniques that will help you develop the leadership skills that will make you, your team, and your company more effective.